Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? By Michael J. Sandel. Introduction, The Quest for Justice. Sandel opens the book by explaining why questions of justice matter in everyday life. He describes how moral disagreements appear in public debates, from price gouging and wealth distribution to affirmative action and same-sex marriage. Justice, he argues, is not merely about laws and policies, it is about how we live together and what we owe one another as citizens. The introduction sets the tone for the rest of the book, which presents major philosophical theories not just as abstract ideas but as tools for thinking about practical moral dilemmas. Chapter 1, Doing the Right Thing. This chapter introduces three classic approaches to justice: maximizing welfare, respecting freedom, and promoting virtue. Sandel illustrates these approaches with gripping real-life stories, including debates over military service, price controls during emergencies, and the moral limits of markets. He explains how utilitarians emphasize overall happiness, libertarians emphasize personal freedom, and Aristotle emphasizes cultivating good character. These themes will reappear throughout the book as Sandel evaluates each theory's strengths and weaknesses. Chapter 2, The Greatest Happiness Principle, Utilitarianism. Sandel presents utilitarianism through the work of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who argue that the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. He explains how this theory tries to assess pleasure and pain with scientific neutrality. But Sandel also shows how utilitarianism can violate individual rights when the happiness of many outweighs the suffering of a few. Using examples such as trolley dilemmas and criminal punishment, he demonstrates both the appeal and the moral risks of basing justice solely on maximizing utility. Chapter 3, Do We Own Ourselves? Libertarianism. This chapter examines libertarianism, which begins with the idea that individuals own themselves and should be free to do whatever they choose, as long as they do not harm others. Sandel discusses the views of Robert Nozick, whose theory opposes taxation for redistribution, government paternalism, and most forms of state intervention. Through examples such as minimum wage laws, conscription, and income taxes, Sandel explores the libertarian claim that justice is rooted in personal choice. He also raises critical questions about inequality and the fairness of markets shaped by unequal starting points. Chapter 4, Markets and Morals. Here, Sandel asks not only whether markets are efficient, but whether there are things money should never buy. He explores the moral limits of markets by touching on topics like military service substitutes, prison upgrades, and the sale of human organs. Sandel argues that markets can corrupt certain social goods by changing their meaning. For instance, paying children to read might undermine the intrinsic value of learning. This chapter highlights a recurring theme. Deciding whether markets belong in a certain area of life requires thinking about what kind of society we want. Chapter 5, What Matters is the Motive, Kant. Sandel introduces Immanuel Kant's philosophy, which holds that moral actions must be guided by duty rather than by the pursuit of pleasure or outcomes. Kant argues that humans have intrinsic dignity because we are rational beings capable of self-governance. Justice for Kant is grounded in universal moral principles, principles we would choose if we treated all persons as ends in themselves, never as mere means. Sandel explains how this framework leads to a strict respect for rights, and he contrasts Kant's approach with the calculations of utilitarianism. Chapter 6, The Case for Equality, Rawls. This chapter explores John Rawls's theory of justice, which imagines what principles people would choose behind a veil of ignorance, unaware of their future class, race, or abilities. According to Rawls, such a fair position would lead people to choose equal basic liberties for all, and economic inequalities allowed only if they benefit the least advantaged. Sandel describes Rawls as offering a powerful challenge to libertarianism and utilitarianism. At the same time, he introduces criticisms of Rawls, especially the claim that the theory is too detached from real-life moral commitments. Chapter 7, Arguing Affirmative Action. In this chapter, Sandel applies moral theories to the debate over affirmative action. He examines arguments based on fairness, compensation for past injustice, diversity, and merit. Sandel shows how different philosophical frameworks lead to different conclusions. For instance, utilitarians might justify affirmative action for its social benefits, while libertarians reject it as a violation of individual rights. Sandel emphasizes that the debate cannot be resolved without addressing deeper questions about desert, equality, and the social purposes of education. Chapter 8: Who Deserves What? Aristotle. Aristotle's theory of justice focuses on giving people what they deserve based on the purpose, or telos, of a social practice. Sandel explains Aristotle's view that justice is inseparable from virtue and from reasoning about the good life. Using examples like honor, athletics, and politics, Sandel shows how Aristotle believes that deciding who deserves what requires understanding the moral purpose of the activity. This approach challenges modern attempts to create value-neutral laws, pushing us to ask what virtues society should promote. Chapter 9: What do we owe one another? Dilemmas of loyalty. Sandel explores the idea that justice is not only about universal principles but also about particular loyalties, to family, community, and nation. He considers whether obligations arise from membership and history rather than consent alone. Through debates on conscription, patriotism, and collective responsibility, Sandel shows how loyalty can complicate our ideas about fairness. This chapter raises the question of whether justice can ever be fully detached from identity and belonging. Chapter 10: Justice and the Common Good. The final chapter brings all the themes together. Sandel argues that justice cannot be understood without discussing the common good and moral purpose of society. He critiques the idea that government should remain neutral on moral questions and suggests that public life requires open discussion about what values we share. Sandel calls for a more robust civic life in which citizens reason together about the moral meaning of political decisions. Justice, he concludes, is not simply about distributing rights and resources, it is about cultivating a society in which we actively participate in determining the good life. Conclusion: a life of moral and civic reflection. Sandel closes by urging readers to engage in public reasoning and moral reflection. Justice, he says, is not only a matter of philosophical theories but a lived practice. To build a better society, citizens must discuss, not avoid, questions of virtue, purpose, and the common good. The book ends with an invitation to take part in this ongoing civic conversation.